I want to pick up on Senator Vitter's point. He's obviously making the point here that FHA is not the only large actor in the mortgage marketplace. It is not the only one with a taxpayer backup, and it is not the only one that currently threatens the taxpayers. We've got Fannie and Freddie out there that are creating a huge problem, and I think we've alluded at various points, and the chairman raised a question about the deep interaction between FHA, Fannie and Freddie, and to some extent the VA, and how these move together. So when we think about underwriting standards, when we think about insurance pricing, for example, that you raised earlier, indemnification rules, risk mitigation rules, I'm concerned. I understand the urgency of stabilizing the FHA, but I'm concerned about approaching reforms in one without approaching reforms in the other. So the question I'd like to put before you is to ask you to speak to this interaction, which you've already raised, Dr. Swagel, I think, and whether it makes any sense to talk about reforming one if we're not reforming the other one simultaneously, and the extent to which we should talk about syncing them. And syncing them doesn't always mean they're the same. It just means they were written with each other in mind in terms of when one would take over and when the other would take over. So I thought I'd start with you, Dr. Swagel, but I'm going to ask everyone to have a chance to comment on this.
Absolutely. It's an important point that changes.
Hit your button.
Oh, okay, good. Changes in one will affect the other. I would start by saying that GSEs has cost taxpayers a lot of money. The CBO now accounts for their risk properly. Right, it uses the fair value accounting. Is the FHA that's the laggard? So that's something that can be done immediately. And again, it's not to say that FHA is any less important, but just to say let's take into account the risks there properly. I think the solvency and the mission really go together. That I don't think you can say, well, let's just fix the solvency of FHA and not worry about the mission, because the high loan level, the high value loans, if the FHA is underpricing its insurance, well, that's not profits, that's more risk. And so, it's almost like a, Woody Allen joke that they're going to, make it up by doing more of it, but they're losing money on each one. So I think you really have to move forward urgently with FHA reforms. And I agree you want to do everything, but I think we all understand GSE reform is kind of often the future, and I just wouldn't wait for that to happen.
But what does it mean to reform FHA if you're not going to reform Fannie and Freddie at the same time? When you've just talked about how one bleeds directly into the other, I think the balloon analogy was the one you used, Mr. Stevens.
That's right, Senator. We believe that there needs to be reform of all three, and they have to be done in concert with each other. As a matter of fact, we've called even further. One of the unique variables of Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae is their regulator and the GSEs can make policy changes without going through the same process that FHA has to go through in the way that they inform the public and have a chance to discuss. And so actions taken sometimes by Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae suddenly produce volume increases to FHA that they didn't even have a chance to consider in concert. So we've actually made a call in the short run that we think the administration should appoint someone to try to get the regulators to work together even on short-term policy actions to make certain that one move doesn't ultimately create an arbitrary bubble on the other side of the scale. And I agree completely that they should be done in concert. My only point was that as long as FHA is sort of the proverbial elephant in the room, until we get it on the right path that everybody agrees, it's kind of difficult to bring that into scope, talking about the overall construct.
Although I would say, Mr. Stevens, any room that has Fannie and Freddie in it, describing anyone else as the elephant, a little tough on that.
I appreciate that.
If I could
Please.
just add, I think one of the things that we do have to keep in mind is one of the differences between FHA and Fannie and Freddie. While Fannie and Freddie may be in conservatorship, they do, on their low down payment loans, have private capital in front of them in the form of private MI. I think sometimes that gets lost in the conversation. And so I think that's one thing. I think there are also things that have already taken place that have helped sort of push borrowers towards FHA, and we spend a lot of time training and helping to educate lenders on the many times when the borrower would actually be better off with a privately insured loan than an FHA loan, and that's been sort of a education experience.
I see. Thank you. Ms. Wardell?
So, Senator, I think your insight that these two are related is absolutely right, and let me make clear exactly why that's true. FHA is if a 100% insurance product, and there is private capital not only in the form of MI, but one would hope if there's some successor to Fannie and Freddie system in the future, the government, if it plays a role, will play a limited backstop standing behind a whole lot of other private capital ahead of it. This is one place where Phil and I absolutely agree. And you want to ensure that as much of the market as possible in times that are good are in places where private capital is well ahead of the government. So to constrain FHA's box without figuring out how much private capital you can get ahead of the government on the other side is going to leave some places, either some loans to fall through the cracks, or will to inevitably delay the date when we can get the sort of reasonable reform of the GSEs. That said, a number of us have talked about things that need to get fixed now. They're either in statute or regulation that everybody knows we need to fix. And I don't believe the political consensus on the GSEs is going to emerge imminently. And so if not, let's get the low-hanging fruit done.
But we got to keep pushing.
We got to keep pushing.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.